This week's Torah reading is called Tetzaveh, which means, and you will command. God tells Moshe Rabbeinu to command the Jewish people to do certain things for the building of the tabernacle, the Mishkan. In this particular reading, we read about the garments of the high priest and the rest of the priests. I'm not going to explain in detail all the garments of the priests because they were quite complicated. And actually, you can find drawings around the internet and so on. You don't need me to explain to you the garments. But there's a very interesting mitzvah, commandment, that apparently doesn't make much sense. But we know that every single thing in the Torah has a meaning and has a lesson we can learn from that. Even the most apparently insignificant things. So the point is like this. From between all the garments of the high priest, we have two garments. One was called Choshen Mishpat, breastplate. It was actually wore on the breast. And the other one was called the ephod, which was like an apron. But you know what? The main part of this apron was actually in the back, not in the front. So we have these two pieces of garment. And the Torah says in Hebrew, you could not remove the breastplate from the apron. They had different laces that united them and so on. You cannot remove this. This is a negative commandment. That means it's a prohibition. You should not remove one thing from the other. That's the mitzvah. Even though we don't ask the whys of the mitzvah, this is what God wants. It's the will of God. However, we can still learn lessons that we see from these mitzvahs. And there's a very interesting thing regarding this prohibition of removing the breastplate from the apron. And the idea is like this. The apron actually, as I mentioned before, the main part was on the back, and not just the back, the bottom back. It went all down to the heels, and the breastplate was worn over here. That means there are two parts, basically, to every single human being. There's a front part, which in Hebrew is called penimius, the most internal parts of a person, the real person, so to speak, you. And there's a back part of a person, which is like the external things of a person. And the Torah is saying over here that you should never remove the internal parts of a person from the external parts of a person. Because if you do that, besides the fact that it's a transgression, you're not really living your life according to the message God is expecting from us. And I'll give you an example. What does it mean to connect the external part with the internal parts? Let's think of a person building a wall. And this person is putting the bricks, one by the other one and one on top of the other one and so on. And he's putting the cement between the bricks and he's doing his job. But he doesn't really know what this wall will serve. It's just a wall. They told him to build a wall and he builds a wall. So we have over here the external part, which is the building, the act of putting the bricks and so on. But we don't have an internal part, like the intention behind it. Why are you doing this? He doesn't even know. And it's going to come a time that he's going to be bored. He's going to be so used to put the bricks, one brick on top of the brick, one brick on to the side of another brick, and so on. He's going to feel, what am I doing? I don't want to do this anymore. It doesn't make any sense. This is completely useless. However, if you inject, so to speak, an intention behind it, you should know, you tell the worker, you should know that the king is going to enjoy your wall because he's going to live in this room that your wall is going to be part of and so on. He's going to do exactly the same act, but with joy. He's going to understand now, what is he doing? What's the purpose over here? What's the usefulness and so on? That's the internal part of the act of, which is an external thing, building a wall and so on. Exactly the same thing happens to every single human being. Sometimes a person fulfills a specific mitzvah or many mitzvahs, doesn't matter, many commandments, and he doesn't really know what he's doing, and he doesn't really understand that he's serving God, who is the Lord of everything, the creator of everything, and so on. It might come a time, and particularly when a non-Jew fulfills his commandments, which is to have a moral, ethical world, and so on. Everybody does this. Like, what's the specialty of this? So it might come a time that a person becomes bored, and a person thinks, there's no usefulness for what I'm doing. Anyway, everybody does this. However, when you tell this person that for every single act of kindness you do in the world, every single moral action you do in the world, every single ethical idea and act you actually provide to some other people, to the world, and so on, you're serving God. God is enjoying what you're doing because you're doing His mission that He commanded every single human being to be a moral, to have a moral place, live a moral life, an ethical life, and so on, and to do acts of kindness, tzedakah, charity, or whatever you want to call it. When a person has this purpose behind it, and he knows that God creates me constantly, and the very fact that God is creating me, that shows me that God wants me, and He's enjoying what I'm doing when I do good, and when I don't do good, and so on. You should know what's going on. When a person has this in mind, this is exactly what the Torah is talking about. You don't remove the inner part of yourself from the most external parts. Even when you're putting one brick on top of another one, to the side of another one, you should know this is not just a wall. This is not just putting bricks. That's boring. That has no purpose. What you're doing, your life has a purpose. Your bricks, so to speak, will serve and do serve the Melech Malchi Amlach, the King of all kings, the Holy One. Blessed be He, God Himself. He's enjoying your wall. He's enjoying the fact that you're doing your mission that He commanded us, and that brings a joy in general in life. But you always have to remember, don't remove the inner part from the external part. Otherwise, it's a transgression, talking about the garments of the high priest. But the main point over here is you might become bored. You might become even depressed. What am I doing? What's the purpose of my life? And you should know God gives us tools to actually save ourselves from that depression and never remove the innermost purpose that you have from the most external actions that you do.